My name is Valerie Bossman, a community campaigner and a political activist. And before I start my video, I just want to ask you, even though you can't answer me back and I won't hear you, but if you're all doing okay, we're in a national pandemic worldwide. It's hit, every single corner of the globe, and we are trying our best to self-isolate. Some of us are in our homes, unable to go to work. Children and young people have ceased to go to school. We've got our government totally, kind of dismayed about this whole situation. And even though they're trying their best, we then have another pandemic, which I've heard people talk about, which is racism. It's crazy. This is almost like a Pandora box opening, and or opposite, maybe a can of worms that have now just hit this society in so many ways that I personally, as a community campaigner, I am lost for words in terms of how to address the issues of racism. It's a very it's without even trying to get too emotional and start to cry and blabber on, it's the death of a black man, George Perry Floyd, in America, who died at 40 something, leaving behind his young child, and over apparently going to a store to buy whatever he was trying to buy. Can't remember what it was, but there's been rumors that it was a counterfeit bill and all sorts of stuff you're hearing off CNN, and whether it's true or not, no one knows. But the fact that he died at the hands of the police is what's really sad. And we know our police are meant to protect us. I still have a lot of faith in our police. I still think there's a lot of work to do in terms of eradicating racism from different industries, like our police, like in education, like even in my own community, in terms of about representation. Um, I always talk about my community because I feel very much a part of it, even though some might disagree and not see the community through my lens. That's fine. But for me, this racism thing now has shown me, even with COVID-19, how my community has changed, and some for the better and some for the worst. So, for example, visibly, I'm black. Hopefully you can see me. I'm not invisible to you on the screen. Um, but locally, I've seen, people will kind of really step a pace back, maybe because I'm wearing my shield, my mouthpiece when I go out, but simply because I know that that's what's going to protect me when I'm going past, because it's invisible, COVID-19, and I'm going strictly by what I've been told by actually the mayor, who said when you go on public transport, wear your face mask, etc. We can really see some people are using this to kind of start a divide in our communities and make other people feel like they're not important or a part of the community. Um, the thing about racism is that, again, back to the community, we know that many people have not been able to access food. So we've then had to go back to the community and say, in the food hubs, how are we best to feed our local, neighbours and the residents. And it's been really interesting because, I'm a Londoner, born and bred, UK Brit, and although I'm Ghanaian diasporan from Africa, my parents, when they were raising me, we'd have bangers and mash. Do love a bit of the gravy and peas. We'd have fish and chips. But then we'd have food like fufu and peanut butter soup. We'd have like meat, fish, boiled egg, yam, plantain, all sorts of foods that maybe some of you out there have never heard of, or maybe you've tried it, I don't know. But in the food hubs, going back to the point, is that we've not had much diversity in terms of the food. And these are the kind of, I would call it, they're not microaggressions, but they're a bit of an ignorance in terms of how we see our community and how we provide for one another. So back to this thing of racism, have some communities been left behind? I think yes. Is it now the right time to talk about statues and, you know, whether it be road, you know, signs or, you know, names of, you know, colleges or universities, etc. Possibly, but I don't think that is the movement that Black Lives Matter want to kind of articulate. It's a part of the discussion in terms of opening up to talk about diversity in its true form. Because when we think of diversity, often, even in the workplace, let's talk about the workplace, we think we'll employ, you know, male and female, or maybe a few young people here and there. And that makes it really diverse, right, in the workplace. But if you look at things like the David Lammy report, and you look at the BBC and how they talk about race audits, it's not because they think they're institutionally racist. I think they themselves have noticed that they've not done a good job in terms of embracing cultural diversity, because there's a difference between cultural diversity and actually the word of diversity. And again, when you bring it back to race and this thing of class v race, it's often the working class, we get left behind. And it's 10 times worse if you're a Black person and you're a woman and maybe you have a disability or you're from the LGBTQ community. You're then more likely to be definitely left behind and totally invisible. And the reason why the Black Lives Matter movement has really picked up is because the death of someone, you know, oceans away has made people see the real inequalities of how Black people are treated differently to their white counterparts. Even if you think about George as a Black male and maybe the stigma of Black men, and he was quite a tall guy, and you can imagine him every day, even maybe even as a youngster, can you imagine him always being taller than his peers, maybe reacting a certain way and being told maybe he was over exaggerating or maybe too big, or, you know, make yourself a bit smaller. Because I remember when I was growing up, often um, being chosen for so many things, because I was quite good at school. I mean, I was never naughty. I loved going to school. It was my escapism. Just loved, you know, meeting other people and talking and you know, being with my teachers, etc. And my parents would tell you I just loved being at school and being good. And on every single sporting activity, I'd always be chosen first, and it made me feel a sense of pride, like I was good at something. But when it came to doing things like theatre productions or, you know, plays within like the religious, you know, sort of Christmas, you know, kind of the reenactment, the retelling of the Jesus story, whatever you want to call it, nativity play, I was never chosen to play like the Virgin Mary. And growing up, that harmed me a little bit, because I thought I was never good enough to play Mary. And it wasn't because I was never good enough. It's because Mary was never depicted as being of color. And is that history's fault? I think yes. I think, you know, over time, things like statues and, you know, artwork and, you know, books that we read have slowly become like watered down. So it's almost as if we try to put, you know when you work in a supermarket, sorry, and the expression is you face up. So you face up the aisle. So you might have like, you know, your beans, you have to make sure all the beans labels are facing the right way. And it's a bit like society now. We've been doing too much facing up. We've been doing too much covering and almost trying to rebrand what we think is diversity and culture and a sense of Britishness. We talk about cultural diversity, cultural capital, you know, all these fancy names, but what does it actually mean to someone growing up as a Black child, as someone from the African or Afro-Caribbean diaspora? Like, does it mean that if you eat with your hand, you're less British? Or if you wear a hijab, for example, and you follow the Muslim, you know, religion, that you're less British? Does it mean that if you wear a head tie like myself, on some days you're having a really bad hair day, does that make you less British? No, it doesn't. And these are things that we kind of, I suppose, as a Black community, talk about the microaggressions of racism and about feeling different. going to school and not being able to, maybe have your hairstyle cut a certain way as a young Black boy growing up, because your culture wants you to be a certain way, but then society says, well, actually, you have to conform. And if you don't conform, then there's a punishment. So straight away, even growing up, you can see a lot of young boys, young Black men feeling a stigma and a complex about their self-identity, about being Black. If you're anyone that is from, the Black, a black sorry background, let's say Afro-Caribbean or African, sorry, that your hair it grows like often double to none. Like I know lockdown, I've seen quite a lot of the sort of MJ styles coming back, and a few kind of afros, and people trying to do the old high top from the 80s, the sort of Bobby Brown haircuts. And that's just a sense of community in the Black community and a sense of self identity. And it's sad that if they went back to school now, they'll be told, cut your hair. When we know lockdown, pandemic, COVID-19, no one's seen to be going to their barbers or their hairdressers. And you've had to go back to your roots. And it's just something about history and how, when you look at the original history books of, Black people and how their hairstyle was, they all had afros. No one knew then about clippers and shavings, and there was none of this sort of like straight cut bobs, like, these weaves that I often wear. Everyone was in afro, and everyone was embraced for that original look. And it's like now we're being told, well, actually, we don't want you to look like that. And that is a part of racism, I personally feel, because no one tells, my white counterpart that they can't have a bob or have their hair as long as Pocahontas down to their back. I know the Sikh community, a lot of people don't cut their hair, and you know, it's more deemed as okay, as opposed to when a Black person grows their afro or cuts their hair a certain way, it's not allowed, or wants to put hair extensions in, braids, and have different colors. We're not allowed to do that. And I think that's a part of those microaggressions of racism. I mean, I could be wrong, but it's just my opinion. And that's why I think Black Lives Matter, a lot of the demonstrations, even though the media's portraying it badly, I think it's been a bit of the working classes coming together, the young kids that are growing up in schools, because a lot of young people are leading this. And I think they're seeing it as a class, a class debate. As a Black working class woman, I'm often told, because I'm in the education, sector, that I'm, my friends sometimes laugh at me and say, oh, you're middle class now. And I say to them, no, I'm not. I'm in the bracket still of just earning enough to survive. And for me, when I've been out on loads of community, protests, and even one that was recently done in Hackney, I think it didn't make frontline press for me, because what I saw on Saturday just gone was the fact that Black and white people came together to protest that all lives matter, but at this particular moment in time, especially during this, pandemic of COVID-19, and how we're seeing disproportionately people dying, Black people dying on the front line. So we know that, again, back to class, many Black people are overqualified on so many aspects in terms of work, but for some reason they fall into the category of always working in the more lower class kind of jobs. So you think of cleaners, I know we call them domestic workers, but cleaners, people that are, postal workers. Think of the bus drivers. You think of the train drivers. These are people that are from a certain demographic, or but still working class. And unfortunately for them, this is why they've tragically died during this pandemic. And when you go on the protests that I've been on, I've looked at the crowd, and this is not to poke fun at anyone that wears a suit, but I've not seen anyone in a snooty suit or in their sort of Sunday best. They've all come out. I think it's the working class communities, and they've come out in solidarity to say, this is about one issue. It's to stand together with our Black brothers and sisters and say enough is enough. And we need to show that Black lives matter on all fronts. And whether that be that we start to employ better in the school education system, in even in Parliament, where you don't see that many, I mean, I know they talk about diversity, but if you look at maybe quotas and how many Black people are actually in Parliament, it's still very few. If you look at, even more recently, the new Vogue editor, a Black man, I mean, that's history in itself. If you think of even over the shores of the United States of America and the first Black, president, if you think of the UN and, we've got the Black guy that's leading at the moment, but, we hardly see Black people in positions of power where really important decisions are made on behalf of all of us. And I know some people might make the argument that, but why should a Black person, lead on certain issues? But I think a Black person would be able to understand again about the microaggressions of, not being accepted and having a voice for everybody, including those of the working class. I think if you think of the story of the Windrush and you think of people that came over in their suits and that were highly skilled, but had to work in certain sort of demenial jobs and had no pride, in terms of they would do these jobs when no one else would do them, I think that speaks volumes for a people that have been so wrongfully oppressed for so many years. And I think it shows the strength of the working class communities. And again, that strength that we have when we come together. So on one hand, Black Lives Matter is about the racial divide and the sense of not having Black people at the forefront. But then it also brings back to the argument of that, when it comes to talking about a certain class system that has oppressed so many even white working class people, we can't let them divide us. And when I say we, I mean the political elite. We need to make sure that we always have the heart of the community and the heart of being working class, Black and white, and we unite to fight and seriously eradicate racism. There's no difference apart from the color of our skin, and we are all one race. We're all human, and we need to make sure we don't make this movement just about statues, and we make it about the inequalities that many working class people are facing, and we bring it back to the center. As a community campaigner and a political activist, speaking to you this afternoon, and as a Black woman, it's interesting, isn't it? Because one of my most fondest, I might even get this wrong, but the late Joe Cox said we have more in common than actually divides us, and it's so pertinent. I mean, it's her anniversary this month, and I remember last year actually holding a Black and Asian minority ethnic forum sort of get together, because her campaign was always about a sense of togetherness, and her legacy will never die because her amazing sister has continued to say that we need to always come together. And when we had our meal last year, I just remember seeing all of us at a table breaking bread, as you say, and of different backgrounds, and it was so beautiful seeing that as adults we were sharing this moment together. And as a mother with, I call them top junior and top senior, I've got a now almost 17-year-old and an almost 5-year-old, and the eldest is seeing what's happening and has so many conflicting issues in her mind about the George Floyd, the death, and about what our government's doing at the moment, the Black Lives Matter movement, statues, the argument of trying to rewrite history and whatever have you. And then I've got my youngest, who, you should see her. She's she's political in her own right, and she doesn't understand what's going on, but she really misses her friends and she misses school and doesn't see colour how my eldest and I are seeing, you know, what's happening at the moment about the race inequalities and the racism and the classism. And it's just for us now, I just want to plead to everybody in your communities, we have got to make things better. We can't wait for legislations to, you know, give us more than 1 month to say Black History Month should be celebrated. We can't wait for the libraries to start to move from not having a book corner of Black books to having actually an array of Black books on every single shelf in every single category of the library. You know, we cannot wait for our schools to say we're going to have International African Day, you know, 12 times in a year. We cannot wait for local councils to, you know, put different statues that represent, you know, the Mary Seacles, or, you know, the many Black men that went to die in the army as soldiers for this country and for all of us to live fruitfully. We cannot wait for example, what happened to me when I was growing up, to play the likes of Dorothy with the red shoes that wanted to go to the land of Oz. You know, we cannot wait for our supermarkets to have more than just a corner of, you know, international foods to say this is what represents culture and diversity. We need to start to stand up and speak up. We need to, you know, embrace Black businesses, embrace Black education, embrace what it means to have a sense of Africa and the Afro-Caribbean diaspora in our communities. We cannot walk around anymore making other people feel that they are invisible to us. We need to really see each other, as my dad used to say, eyeball to eyeball. We need to really embrace that sense of community and that sense of togetherness, and know that we definitely, Black and white, have to unite to eradicate racism and educate one another about the sense of togetherness and not allow racism to divide us. It's up to us to make a difference and to make this world a better place. And it sounds cliche, but it really is the truth. We have to unite and hold hands, and not hold hands and be germaphobes and be like, oh, you're Black, I'm white, but hold hands to embrace difference and a sense of belonging, and really start to love ourselves as humanity, one race, human kindness.